Hi y'all, as promised, and I maybe should have put on a lavalier mic, so if the sound isn't so great this time, we'll have it better next time. I'll take a listen to it and see. But and funny, yeah, there's going to be beeping in cars, right? Right when I started, it was completely peaceful before, partially due to the lockdown, no one's going out, and also because it is freezing cold right now in Colorado, and as you know from my intro, I'm right by this window in my cozy little reading corner, but I don't yet have my cool picture hung up, which you're gonna love. It's this freaky deaky, scary as shit clown picture I got from Goodwill that I love. But, so I've gone through the first chapter. I don't know how many of you guys are reading this as well. I don't really expect right now because it's just a handful of you guys here in my Patron account or Patreon or whatever it's called. But I want to give you some of my thoughts. First off, as an introduction, I just adore Jim Gray. He's such a gentleman. But, and I'm just getting out my tools. But when ideologically, he and I couldn't be further apart. I mean, we're both libertarians, so I guess we could be further apart. He could be a statist, and he's not. He's just a very moderate libertarian. But I don't have an issue with that. The party needs all kinds. And I think that's one reason why he asked me to review his books, because of our differences, and he knows that I'll be fair with it, and I don't just automatically go, oh, you know, and I don't play the not a real libertarian game, and he's just such a gentleman. Let me tell you, the one thing that really impressed me about Judge Gray, when he was running in 2020, we had a real honest discussion about why I couldn't support his candidacy. And I mean, as a delegate, if he ended up being our nominee, absolutely. But he was like so mature about it. And so many people aren't mature about those sorts of things. He's like, I completely understand. And our differences were on taxation. You know, he's not a taxation is theft kind of guy. And he's all about the fair tax. And I think the fair tax is an abomination. And we're going to get into some of that here. Though what he suggested here is not the fair tax. I like what he suggested in at least the first chapter of this book much better than the fair tax. So I've made all kinds of notes. I'm not sure what kind of format I'll stick with these discussions. We'll see. So there is a preface by Congressman Tom Campbell. I am not exactly sure who that is, but apparently it sounds like a Liberty Republican. And I really liked some things that were said in the introduction I'd like to read to you, or in the preface. So Congressman Campbell said, Judge Gray has specific proposals for almost all of our society's challenges. Even more importantly, he illustrates how those proposals follow from principle, so that one has a guide to resolving problems to come, which might be only dimly seen today. I love that he acknowledged that. To me, some people view this in some ways as a flaw of libertarianism, that it thinks it can be consistent, and that, you know, what is the thing? Only Sith think in absolutes. But, you know, I don't think you should get your ideology from Star Wars. But that to me is the beauty of libertarianism, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel with each problem. You have a certain framework of principle that you can apply to any problem. And you can be assured that while other libertarians might not come to the exact solution, it'll at least be a solution in the same family. It won't be radically opposite. And to me, I think that is wonderful. It gives quite a guide for public policy. And then continuing with Congressman Campbell. The principle is individual liberty married to responsibility. We do not emphasize that enough. Listen, I'm a shameless libertine. I say that all the time, or want to be, because my life is so freaking conservative that I probably am like the world's worst libertine. But philosophically, I'm a shameless libertine. But that doesn't mean there isn't responsibility. And I think we as a party flirt with irresponsible libertinism. And nope, that's not the way. If a public policy proposal increases individual liberty, we should favor it, provided no one else is specifically hurt. It is amazing how many of today's seemingly intractable problems yield solutions under that principle. It is amazing. And I think people shy away from it because it just seems too simple, but it actually is that simple. Implementing it might not be, but stating the solution is actually quite simple. And Congressman Campbell is sure to note, Judge Gray does see a role for government. I don't. Properly defined. I would more say the state. I don't see a role for the state. There will always be government. But here, it's being used as one and the same with the state, I think. I'm not so sure Congressman Campbell would thread that needle the way I do. Now here is something that I just never thought of. You can't possibly think of anything. Some of you guys might go, what are you, a dummy? You never thought of this? Nope, I didn't. In talking about the FDA, Campbell notes something that Judge Gray had said to him, that Judge Gray believes since we can't know the safety of drugs on our own, the government should decide whether a particular therapy is likely to do harm. Why does it have to be the government is my question. But I do think there should be institutions or even companies. You know, we can't know this on our own. There needs to be some way to provide that information. I don't think it needs to be the government. And if it's unproven, I don't think it should be illegal. That's where I would differ with Judge Gray. But here's where it got interesting, what I never really thought about, if we were going to take the more moderate libertarian approach. He goes on, these risks should be made plain to the consumer, agreed. Thereafter, the consumer's choice should govern. The U.S. government demands more, that a drug must be proven effective as well as safe. And here's the part that I thought was brilliant, I just never really thought about, because I just go, freedom. Whether or not a drug is effective should be left to the consumer, advised as she or he. That drives me crazy. Why did you reverse she or he? Political correctness run amok. It should just use they and be done with it. But if you're going to use she's and he's, don't go she or he. Just go he or she. That's the standard formulation. That just made me pull up short out of the sentence and get bothered. And that is a poor way of communicating. But let's continue. As she or he wishes by her or his doctor. You gotta be fucking kidding me. His or her, okay, dude? That one change in the law would both lower the cost of pharmaceuticals and save lives. That, I don't know why that didn't occur to me. That even if you were going to posit a limited role for the FDA, effectiveness, if it's safe, how's it the government's business if it's effective? And plus placebos are effective to some people. The brain is a wondrous thing. Then there's an introduction, which is by Judge Gray himself. He notes that he does a weekly podcast that has the same title of All Rise. Now, he explains the title, which I wouldn't have gotten. I immediately just thought of the legal, because I'm a paralegal, so I thought of, when a judge enters the room, the bailiff says, all rise. But he says there's a double wordplay here. The premise of both this book and the podcast is that if we employ libertarian values and approaches, we will all rise together. That's pretty clever. And he notes that he has a lot of information at his website, judgejimgray.com. Haven't checked it out yet, but I will. So now chapter 1, which is entitled Liberty is in Our Genes. And boy, do I agree with that. I've often said, well, actually I've said a lot lately during this whole discussion about government mandates, that it's just a kind of oppositional defiance disorder is in our genes. Call it liberty, call it just don't tell me what to doism. That is an American thing. Like some people go, the British are terminally polite. We are terminally oppositional. So, Judge Gray notes, the most important function of government is to protect our freedoms and liberties from the encroachment of government. The second most important was keeping us safe. So he's talking about the two things that the government was supposed to do when the country was founded. Unfortunately, that principle has gotten lost in much of American politics today, but it still runs through the blood and veins of the Libertarian Party. Disagree slightly here, Judge Gray. Libertarian Party is agnostic on whether or not a government should even exist, which he probably doesn't agree with, but that's okay. A lot of us, have differences of opinion. But what I found interesting and a bit of a cognitive dissonance, but of course this isn't a criticism against him. This is why I'm an anarchist, because I just found this dissonance endemic to minarchism and I couldn't resolve it, where he said the most important function of government is to protect our freedoms and liberties from government. The fox guarding the hen house, how well has that worked out? I mean, I think it's just logical that the entity that you need to be protected against can't be safeguarded by that very entity. And as far as the second most important was keeping us safe, I don't agree with that either. I think it's our personal responsibility to keep ourselves safe. That governance is there to punish people who aggress against us, but not to keep us safe, because we all have different risk levels. And government can't have a one-size-fits-all. It can punish aggression. And even some of us, what's funny with the justice system now is the government decides when we've been aggressed against, whether we think so or not, and will prosecute someone, saying it's for public policy, even if the victim doesn't feel victimized or want the person prosecuted. So I'm continuing some more of my notes. And right now, I haven't actually written out notes. I've just highlighted things he said that are good talking points, I think. A dictionary will tell you that liberty is the state of being free in a society. I guess that's decent enough. But free from what? I don't think free from is the way I would define it. It assumes that the default is restriction. I would define liberty as free to, not free from. And it says here, free from oppressive restrictions thrust upon our lives, political views, and behaviors by authority. Again, presuming authority. I view authority as the unnatural state. But what authority would do such a thing? The government. And earlier said, it's the government to protect us against the government. I'm not so sure he sees that contradiction. But again, this is quite a very mainstream libertarian view. So he says, liberty is one prong of a two-pronged bargain. Enjoy your state of freedom, but take seriously the responsibilities that come with it. I don't view liberty as opposite to responsibility, as two prongs. I think it's better to view them married as two sides of the same coin. Maybe I'm just nitpicking here. And he continues, of course we need government. Disagree. If he means the state. We do need governance. We do need enforcement of some sort. He says we need a military, national police. We need a national police? Disagree. We need a military. We need defense. I'm not so sure we need a military. We might like one. Let's continue. And libertarians disagree on that. I mean, that's just the way it is. And a judiciary to enforce laws. We do need a judicial system, whether it's ran by the government or not, or the state is another matter. to enforce laws that protect our rights, persons, and property from wrongful assaults and takings by others. Correct, including the government, which he acknowledged earlier. We need the means to enforce contracts, warranties, child labor laws, safety in the workplace, and antitrust so that we can live under the rule of law together. Very interesting mixture there. Should there be child labor laws is probably something that libertarians disagree with. I would, when it comes to children, that's where I'm the most statist. So I'm trying to think like somebody who's not quite as statist as I am when it comes to that. But I think the child labor laws we have right now are absolutely ridiculous. And antitrust. For me, the jury's out on that. Pun intended, Judge Gray. The jury's out on that. I think he should have just put to enforce laws that protect us against aggression, but... Okay, so... Oh, and oh my goodness. I want to note that this book was written this year, after his run, or during his run. So it's a 2020 book. So we don't have to read into something that he didn't intend, because, you know, the pandemic will be obviously in his mind, where he wrote, the more we are sold a narrative of fear, the more docile we become. Haven't we seen that? I don't think this is true for everyone, but it is enough true that it is the norm and therefore a rule with some exceptions. The more I get sold a narrative of fear, the more less obedient I become. And he says, relying upon the government is a trap. It's a trap.
It's a trap.
Big government trades on keeping us in fear as a justification for encroaching upon our liberty. Oh my God, is that happening today, isn't it? What would our founders say about those encroachments on our liberty? What would they say about us tolerating them? I think they would condemn us in the strongest possible terms and say we are not worthy heirs of their legacy. I think they're rolling over in their graves. Just as I think David Nolan's rolling over in his grave at the silence of the National Libertarian Party on this. Then he talks about poverty and the way free enterprise and private property is the only way to lift people out of poverty. But then he goes on to this is quite a longer quote than I'm going to be giving here. He says, of course, that doesn't mean we shouldn't voluntarily provide a safety net for those people who are truly in need. The voluntarily, I'm assuming he means voluntary charity, but I'm not so sure if he doesn't mean voluntarily have government programs. Government is forced, it's not voluntary. So I'm a bit unclear here. Continuing, I was in the Peace Corps, I care about people. Though we have no legal obligation to support anybody, so perhaps he is then talking about charity. I do believe a safety net for our people is crucial. Agreed. And then he goes on to talk about government. So it's funny. Where he says we don't have a legal obligation, then he goes to impose one. But here's where he has a different tax proposal other than the fair tax. And this one, I'm going to read it, and then I'll say why I think this is superior to the alleged fair tax, which is the unfair theft. He says, my proposal would combine a federal graduated income flat tax with a system of government stipends proposed by Milton Friedman. The flat tax means, with these numbers used only for illustration, that no one would pay any federal income taxes on the first $30,000 of earnings. Not you, me, or even Bill Gates. But all differentiations between earned and interest income and capital gains would be dissolved. Then for every dollar earned between $30,001 and $100,000, each person would pay 8 cents to the government with no deductions involved. For those fortunate enough to earn between $100,000 and $100,001, I guess where you read it, and $500,000 in a year, they would pay 12 cents on those dollars. And those blessed to make over $500,000 per year would pay 20 cents for those dollars. End of discussion. Much, much better than the fair tax because it doesn't impose a new tax. It just reforms the current one to make it lower. But what I don't like about it is I don't like getting rid of deductions. I think that initiates fresh aggression. I know he's trying to simplify things. But perhaps he thinks it's balanced out by no one paying any taxes on the first $30,000. So again, I might be able to live with this. I'd have to think about it some more, but I can tell you right off it's better than the fair tax. And then he continues. So now, what about the poor? Everyone in our country who is 18 years of age or older and is either a citizen or green card holder who earns no money. This, though, I'll get into this in a minute, would receive a stipend I think that's the way it's pronounced, from the federal government of $15,000 a year, probably broken into monthly payments of $1,250. But for every dollar they earned between 0 and 30,000, they would lose 50 cents of their stipend. Thus, of critical importance, everyone would always have a financial incentive to earn the extra dollar, which is fundamentally missing in today's welfare system. Okay. Again, might be able to get on board with this, but see, right now, I don't really have an issue with people not paying any taxes. Good for you. You got rid of, you escaped theft. You're working under the counter, whatever. Good for you. But here, if you do that, then you steal money. And people are always going to work under the counter. So I'm still cogitating on that. I guess all it would mean is then I would have a problem with them not reporting it up to 30,000 because they wouldn't be owing any money, and I don't think people should have to report, but as long as they didn't claim the theft money, and if the 50 cents is the right amount, I don't know. Okay, but that's better than what we have now, I do think. But does it encourage people not to earn any money? That's a whole other item. I do think it encourages people to find a way to work under the counter and collect theft money. But I'm looking at the beagle. She's rubbing herself all up against the bed. Zena, what are you doing? What are you doing, crazy whiny dog? I'm hoping oh yeah, here's where I highlighted something that I think, not that I disagree with, but I think he's not seeing the actual issue. So it says a truly added plus would be that this proposed system would come close to resolving the homeless problem on an institutional basis. How is that? Today's responses mostly come about when politicians feel some political heat, which often results in large amounts of public money being spent on things like putting up the homeless in motels for a few months. Then they turn to other pressing needs, while after those few months, the homeless problems go on as before. But if the homeless had the equivalent of an ATM account that had automatically $1,250 in it each month, the free enterprise system would quickly respond by establishing fairly inexpensive room and board facilities. Disagree. Without something else. There used to be rooming houses. There used to be a lot in cities of very fairly inexpensive room and board facilities that got completely shut down by the government regulation. Those would exist today even without the system he's proposing. And I fear that he has ignored that here. Now he talks about his change to become a libertarian from being a Republican. But the moment I knew my values no longer aligned with the party in which I claimed membership was when President George W. Bush signed into law the so-called Patriot Act on October 26, 2001. It took me all of 13 seconds, to decide that I really am a libertarian and I will be libertarian for life, which he has been, unlike fucking lying Bill Weld. Do you think that the government will ever announce that the so-called war on terror will be over? No. War is once declared. particularly ambiguous ones like that never end. And then he talks about his life motivation. And he says, one of the worst things that could ever happen to a person is to be on their deathbed, looking back over their lives and lamenting, I wish I would have, or I wish I would not have. I've tried not to let that happen to me. For the most part, I agree. I definitely think there shouldn't be I wish I would haves. Sometimes there's things we might have wished we would not have, but they were really critical to us. And funny, I am like such a librarian. I'm going to let him know this. I don't know if you can see this. There's a typo. What is the COVID-19? The COVID-19 crisis. Somebody forgot a C. I see they forgot a C. I will let him know in case there's other printings of this. And then he talks about the debates, the presidential debates. And I did not know that when the League of Women Voters, God bless them, was basically forced out of the debates, they left with a public statement saying, we will not be part of the hoodwinking of America. That needs to be advertised more. He says, nevertheless, the debates, under the complete control of the two parties, such a scam that people do not realize, have kept America hoodwinked ever since that time. And here's something I didn't really even consider. Talking about the control of the two parties. They even control aspects of operating debates by choosing moderators, topics to be addressed, and how long they'll have to answer. They just completely control the narrative and expect us to go along like little robots. And then he deals with third parties. He says third parties have always played a critical role in American politics, and noted that the Republicans were a third party that took over the Whig Party in the late 1850s, though that's the last time a third party became a major party. So he said, how can we break this cycle? Let's start with the debates. And here is an interesting proposition. It's more generous than the Libertarian Party proposes, but I like this. Would be a good start. Allow every candidate that is on even one statewide ballot to participate in some fashion in these very public debates. Just by allowing each one to make a 3-minute statement at the beginning of each debate would allow voters to hear and consider each candidate's most important issues firsthand. Third-party candidates have much to add to the free flow of ideas, but when their voices are stifled, democracy loses. What fucking excuse could the duopoly have for that modest proposal? They don't like competition. Talk about antitrust. And now he talks about how there's really no negative feedback loop for government. They indemnify themselves. And he quotes Thomas Sowell. Sowell? Yeah, that's how it's pronounced. It's hard to imagine a more stupid or dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. Of course, this simply emphasizes the fact, and the of course is the Sowell quote ended. This is Judge Gray now. Of course, this simply emphasizes the fact that there's an enormous difference between a government of stated good intentions and a government that actually produces positive results. And then he's quoting somebody else here. I'm not sure who he's quoting, but he has it in quotes. Big government is really good and effective at one thing, and that is increasing the size, power, and cost of big government. But he's talking about the state here. I think all state is big government. He says as if it's possible to have a state that is not big government. Continuing. He states, libertarians would categorize themselves as being financially responsible and socially accepting. I've always hated that formulation. Financially responsible, yes. Socially accepting? Depends, I guess, on how you define accepting. While I think a humanitarian, cosmopolitan type of libertarianism, which is what I hold, is very accepting, I don't think that's necessarily required to be a libertarian. You don't have to be accepting at all. You just got to not want to use force against people. But you could be a complete asshole. Thus the statement, you are free to live your life the way you choose as long as you don't wrongfully hurt other people or take their stuff, is frequently used to explain our views. And now I agree with that, but where is acceptance in there? It's not. And then he gives an example of unintended consequences, which I love. I'm going to be using this because I didn't know this. He said, in 2016, I took a vacation and traveled to Egypt. I noticed that many people lived on the first and second floors of four-story houses where third and fourth floors were still only outlined in rebar. The reason? Owners are not required to pay property taxes on unfinished houses. So there was an incentive never to finish construction. And he had talked about, which this I knew, there were some areas of the world and even in certain periods of time where homes were taxed by the number of windows that they had. So people painted windows just to give it a nice looking facade. Or it was the windows facing the street, so they would load up the back with windows. Okay, so that is it for chapter 1. So far, I'm really enjoying this. It has given me a lot of food for thought. And chapter 2, which we will do next, and maybe you will read along, is entitled Libertarian Thought and the Libertarian Party, a tour de horizon. Okay, till next time. Mi guapas de libertad.